The Witcher, the ultimate monster-killing machine in their own world. With silver and steel, they cut down men and beasts alike. Enhanced by their trials of the grasses, in a way they are like fantasy space marines. Stronger, faster, except Witchers also get to be better in bed. They are fearsome things in their own world, Witchers, but what if one of them made their way to Warhammer's old world, where monsters are as common as beards on dwarves? Hello ghouls and gals, I am your wretched crypt ghoul, and today we're crossing over two fantasy worlds in perhaps my last and certainly my most desperate attempt at making this What If series and possibly even this channel kick off. Today, we're asking what if a Witcher managed to make it into the Warhammer world? How long would they last? What would they be capable of taking down? Who would be their allies and enemies in the old world? With these what if scenarios, usually I have to spend a fair bit of time explaining how the thing that's in the title of the video comes to pass. However, on this occasion, it's really easy to pop a Witcher into the old world because The Witcher, as an IP, often messes with multiple universes. Monsters came to the world of The Witcher thanks to the conjunction of the spheres after all, and Ciri travels between realms, so to say a random portal opens up and pops Geralt of Rivia down in Warhammer's wilderness is not too far-fetched of an idea. That's right, I'm not just popping down any Witcher in Warhammer because we're going with Geralt. Largely, that's because he's the most recognisable Witcher, but also, I think thanks to the games and books, we have a lot of information on what he's capable of. I will point out Geralt is a legendary Witcher, the Karl Franz of Witchers if you will, meaning he's more capable than 99% of his colleagues in monster hunting, but I'll be sure to raise that when we're talking about the kinds of beasties he'd be capable of taking down. We're going to start Geralt down in the Empire, mostly because it's the most recognisable place in Warhammer Fantasy, filled with humans, and secondly because I'm not sure if I fancy Geralt's chances if I say put him in the Badlands or in the centre of a Lustrian temple city. Bretonnia, the Border Princes, they might be places where Geralt would find somewhat of an equal footing to the Empire, but I'm putting him more towards the centre of the action. As I said, through a portal, Geralt finds himself in some familiar looking woods before venturing towards a shoddy looking village. In that village he finds that again people are calling him a mutant. Witchers aren't much liked in their homelands for having cat's eyes and weird bodies that seem to charm all the ladies with their veiny abs. However, the people in the village Geralt enters wouldn't be hiding their wives and daughters and would instead be accusing him of falling to some dark gods called Chaos. Mutants aren't welcome in most of the Empire and they're especially feared and hated in backwater villages like the one Geralt would find himself in here. Geralt's not the type for killing civilians, even when they come at him armed with pitchforks and torches. He could flee here, but unless he made his way into a more progressive city like Altdorf, he's likely going to find similar situations. Perhaps he'd be able to prove his worth by fighting off a Beastman raid or something similar. I'm not trying to make this a narrative-focused video, as instead I'd like to look at how a Witcher in Warhammer might influence the wider picture, but we will need to zoom in occasionally to show how Geralt individually would survive. Like he did in his own world, after realising that the Warhammer world was full of more monsters than he could handle, Geralt would start earning money by ending them where he could. A Minotaur here, a small pack of goblin spider riders there. Geralt would quickly earn coin and reputation as a bounty hunter that specifically hunts monsters. The problem for Geralt is that many of the monsters in Warhammer are sentient. Even trolls have some form of sentience, even if they are incredibly stupid. Usually Geralt would avoid contracts against these monsters, but after seeing the pure evil of most of Warhammer's factions, I think he'd be willing to let the sentience thing slide. It's going to be a bit of a culture shock seeing a world where humans aren't the worst thing around. Humans aren't the best folk in Warhammer's old world, but they're saints compared to the creations of Chaos, Orcs, Demons and Skaven. Geralt is also going to be quite shocked when he finds out that the humans in the Warhammer world have pretty decent relationships with the elves and especially the dwarves. Unlike in the Witcher world, only non-humans that are considered tainted by chaos are hated in the majority of Warhammer settlements, and so once word begins to spread that Geralt is no chaos mutant, but a mutant who fights chaos, you would imagine he'd be largely free to live without anyone trying to ram a pitchfork in his belly. That pretty much sorts out how Geralt would adjust to the world, really. At least in terms of getting over the initial shock. The only other thing to mention is that Geralt is going to be mortified when he sees that not all of the sorceresses in the world are beautiful women, unless we're talking elves and Kislev Ice Witches. All of the Empire lot are men, of course, besides a few standouts, meaning that poor Geralt is going to have to search far and wide if he wants a Yen or Triss replacement. This isn't what if the Witcher was suddenly transported to Warhammer though, it's what if a Witcher was brought into the Warhammer world. Yes, there is a difference, and it's about looking at how the setting might change if suddenly there was a guy who's specifically designed to kill monsters. First of all, I might have to hit you with the disappointment hammer, kids, as I will say that I don't think one individual can alter the Warhammer world. Warhammer exists to sell lots of plastic. Armies of plastic, which means armies are required every time you want something to happen in-universe. Karl Franz needed an army, Archaon needed an army, Geralt of Rivia is a one-man army in many ways, but put him up against any small host of Warhammer troops and he's not coming home alive. Nevertheless, I still think he can have some sort of impact in the world. As I said though, this all depends on how much notoriety Geralt gets. If there were suddenly 1,000 Witchers in the Warhammer world, well, you've got an army there, something you can take a town with. But Geralt is going to need to kill stuff without getting killed in order to get to the point where local authorities can rely upon him to deal with threats in their towns and cities. Now, is Geralt going to be a willing aid to these authorities, considering he usually steers clear of politics? Yes. I don't think in Warhammer you can really pick political sides. You're either with normal humans or you're against them in a way, which is why even though the Empire isn't perfect, it's still the protagonist faction in the old world. I'd imagine that Geralt would at first get mistaken for a witch hunter. Witch hunters aren't too dissimilar from witchers in the roles they play, except for the fact that witchers are all about monster slaying and witch hunters care more about heresy and rooting out those that defy the realm of Sigmar. Also, while witch hunters undergo some heavy physical training, they don't get cool mutant powers or the ability to use magic. That said, they do get a gun a lot of the time, which can beat spells quite easily if you've got a decent aim. So Geralt would be like this supreme witch hunter for hire. Once his name and reputation spreads to the ears of the Elector Counts, you can be sure they'll want to meet this mutant for good themselves. When he meets any sort of major authority, Geralt would again inform them that he's not a witch hunter, something they easily identify as he doesn't believe in Sigmar. Then they'll ask what he exactly is. After finding him to be a stronger and faster than average human, with the ability to see in the dark and cast simple spells, any Elector Count or even the Emperor would see a great benefit in having a regiment or full army of men like Geralt. The Witcher cannot give them the secrets to making more of him, however, as he doesn't know them. Geralt wasn't privy to how he was made in the Trial of the Grasses, and even if we're talking Geralt after the events of The Witcher 3, where they used the Trial of the Grasses to get to Ciri, Vesemir was the one who knew how to recreate the Trials of the Grasses, and they needed Yennefer in order to do them properly. That won't stop Imperial mages and doctors from trying though. Alchemists take blood samples and sorcerers try and enact rituals to recreate the effects, but the best they can get is some half-baked humans who are mostly existing in pain. The Church of Sigmar thinks it heresy to purposefully create mutants, and the whole operation is largely seen as a bit of a dud. Still, this gets the cogs going in making the Emperor wonder about how his men can be better, and so he asks Geralt to begin training the witch hunters in the future. They already get quite a bit of physical training before becoming witch hunters, but if they could match Geralt in even some aspects of his swordplay, they'd become a much more elite battlefield presence, as well as seekers of all things that defile the land of Sigmar. And so, with fat stacks of cash in hand, Geralt gets to work. It's not too far-fetched to think that a man can match a witcher's skills. At least, the best men could. Leo Bonnar, after all, was just a very, very skilled bounty hunter, and Geralt trained Ciri to be good enough to beat him in melee, so it stands to reason that some of Warhammer's witch hunters have a chance at matching witches. Few of them, but some. However, as Geralt begins his training efforts, he quickly realises that there are a few problems amongst the witch hunters. Most of them feel like extra training to beat monsters and evil is all well and good, but they don't really want to be taught by a mutant, nor do they want to be taught by a man who has no attachment to Sigmar. Even those that do train aren't really able to be moulded in the way that Geralt wishes in order for them to be the fighters that they could be. Therefore, Geralt recommends that either the witch hunters no longer follow religious zealotry as much as their own will and want to help people, and that he begin to train boys rather than men. After all, Ciri was trained from a young age and she was his most successful student. Instead of removing the pious identity from witch hunters, Karl Franz instead informs Geralt he will have his school, but he will have his own unit called the Empire's Footmen. They are not to be loyal to Sigmar, or even to the Emperor, but they will defend the Empire, its values, and its people with their lives. Geralt can agree to that, as then these trainees won't fall to the corruption of a poor Emperor or have to follow the teachings of a god he doesn't believe in. Word soon spreads of this school where the finest swordsmen and women are trained. Geralt has complete control over this school, which is run from a keep in the middle of Reichland, and so he allows anyone to come and train if they wish. Dwarves, Bretonnians, even some elves make the pilgrimage, and each become as effective at fighting monsters and evil men as slayers are, except without the mohawks and oaths that they'll seek out the most dangerous enemy possible in the hopes they fall to it. So, in a way, Warhammer does get an additional army thanks to the Witcher showing up, but not one to field in a pitched battle. If Geralt were to have been thrown into battle alongside the forces of the Empire, without plot armour I don't think he lasts too long. A stray bit of magic or the sheer number of enemy forces could take him down. If your name isn't Gotrek, it's really hard to make an impact as a lone agent, but I think it is a pretty fair way to show how much a single man from another world could change Warhammer's old world. At the very least, the countryside might be a bit safer. Before we wrap up, I'll do a quick rundown of the monsters I think Geralt could and couldn't kill. Trolls? Yes. Goblin? Yes. Black Orc? Yes. Rat Ogre? Yes. Croxigor? Yes. Skinwolf? Yes. Beast of Nurgle? Yes. Squigs? Yes. Giant? Probably. Dragon? No, they fly. Hellpit Abomination? I'm gonna say 50-50. Almost every other Witcher wouldn't have a chance, but Geralt is Geralt. Carnosaur, again another maybe, definitely not if a capable Saurus is riding it. Dread Saurians are another definite no, alongside greater demons and things like that. If you've got any more suggestions for things that you think Geralt could take down, let me know. As always, thanks for watching, ghouls and gals. Please do remember to like, subscribe and share if you can. Let me know what you thought, and until I see you, I have been your lowly crypt ghoul, and have a good one.